Welcome to Parent Coaches Unleashed with Carrie and Jessica, where no topics are taboo or off limits. Join us as we let loose and discuss the real, raw feelings about parenting.
In each episode, we will bring you heartfelt discussions, real-life stories, and special guests that will both entertain you and encourage community so no one feels alone in their parenting journey.
Thanks so much for listening. Now let's start the show. Hello there. Welcome to today's episode. We have a first as we have two guests, both extremely experienced psychologists with very different training. And we are going to hop right in because we have a lot to discuss today. So we are going to introduce both of our guests and their backgrounds.
Hi, everybody. Let me first introduce you to Dr. Jill Kristal. She is a clinical psychologist who has practiced in both New York and London for over 30 years. In her private practice, she treats young children up through adults, finding that each age helps inform the others. While living abroad, Jill led the American Counseling Center and worked extensively in international relocation, where she created a series of game-based products to help families navigate these major transitions. Back in the U.S., Jill worked with an international school search firm, helping to place children with special education and emotional needs. She went on to work with Kimochis, a social emotional learning company, and co-authored a guide for therapists in using these playful tools. She's also trained in EMDR and is head of the Westchester County Trauma Recovery Network, which provides referrals for community members and first responders involved in countywide disasters or events.
Thank you.
Welcome, Jill.
And we also have Dr. Debra Green. She received her PhD in school psychology at NYU and is a certified school psychologist and a licensed clinical psychologist living and working in New York. She was the chief psychologist for the Pleasantville Union Free School District for over 20 years and retired from that position in 2018. Dr. Green has continued to work in her private practice for greater than 30 years. She has served on the board of the Westchester County Psychological Association for many years and continues to supervise interns and early career psychologists in the field. So, welcome, Debbie and Jill.
Wow. Ladies, what an impressive resume between the two of you. You have a lot to share. We have a lot of knowledge to gain from both of your experience. So I'm just going to open it up with, what do you see? What are you noticing with our youth today? What are the big issues you're noticing?
You go. I just read an article in the paper saying that like the rates of anxiety in young people are coming down. I haven't seen that yet. So maybe across the board, but people who are being referred, and again, regardless of age range, there's a lot of anxiety out there about going to school, not going to school, about the climate, about something happening to family members, about now that we're starting a new school year, I'm seeing kids who are having anxiety about, should I be allowed in the 4th grade or the 10th grade? Do I really know enough? And what if I'm not good enough? And so I'm still seeing a lot of anxiety.
And it's an interesting question that you asked because for years, long ago, we've been around a while doing this, I got, and I think you did too, we got a lot of referrals for kids with ADHD and executive dysfunction, which hurt them. This is the kid population and some adults, newly diagnosed adults with ADHD. So the calls would be, I'm looking for someone that can help me with my such and such year old kid who has ADHD. Then things switched pre-COVID and exacerbated by COVID. I need someone to give my kids strategies to deal with depression and anxiety. Can you give my kid CBT, DBT. They Googled and asked for things. And then during and after COVID, and more recently, and we're both trained in it, I get these calls from people. I don't think they exactly know what they're talking about. They know the buzzwords and they have a sense that there's something off, but they're asking for a therapist that's trained in trauma-informed therapy. And there are so many different kinds of traumas, big T, little t. We're both trained in EMDR. We can talk about that later if you want. But there's so many different ways to deal with trauma. And those, I'm getting more and more calls. And you know what? And this has something to do with the schools too. I'm a trained school psychologist. Jill is not, but she knows a lot about kids in schools. And school's about to start, if it hasn't already, in some of these states. And there are many psychologists, social workers who have private practices who never call schools, never talk to teachers, never talk to school social workers, guidance counselors, psychologists. Jill is not one of them. She often connects with and has strong bonds with the school districts around here and the school districts of the kids that you service. And I was a school psychologist. So for me, understanding kids in schools and what they're dealing with is really important, right?
Yeah, and something else that you reminded me of, I'm seeing 3 recent college grads who all graduated in June who are struggling to find work, but it's like this depression that comes over them because these are kids who've grown up in communities where they were good. You're so smart. You're so talented. And then they get to college and you got to go to a good college so you can get a good job. And they come out expecting like every door to be open to them and for people just, knocking down the doors to try and get to them. And what they're discovering is I'm not really any different than any other kid out there. Like the fact that I went to X school or have X, degree doesn't seem to matter. And it really is impacting them in negative ways.
So do you think that this is the first time, for example, with these 3, that they've really had to work really, really hard? Like, is that part of it? Or is it just that
worked really hard? But I think they thought that they were like going to Oz, like that it was all going to be just open and waiting for them and that they were going to walk into some really interesting job where they were respected and valued. And that's not what happens in most jobs. And so I think it's that discrepancy. And I think it could be a real disservice to how we're raising our kids and the messages that we're sending.
So that's a very interesting point you bring up. So these 3 separate cases that you're dealing with, I know one of the words that's been thrown around a lot is entitlement or raising kids from the everybody gets a trophy era. Do you think that plays a part in it, that they have certain expectations of what they've had throughout life?
That's on us as parents and educators.
100%, yes. I don't disagree with that at all. I'm just wondering if that's what you're seeing creeping up in these cases.
That is nothing new. And we work in a lot of different communities. The school district where I worked was not as affluent as the district that I work in and that I live in. That's nothing new. The privilege, the entitlement, and the pressure early on. I mean, we have 8th graders, 7th graders worried about their grades. And in New York, you take the regents and which classes are you taking? And are they getting ahead of the others? And I think they come from a history of everybody gets an award, everybody gets a trophy. But I don't think that's something new.
I would agree with that. But it's just, it's interesting to me because it's happened with pretty much each of the college grads that I'm seeing.
Yeah.
Right.
So then if you had to weigh in, what would you say is the root cause of it?
Well, I think some of it is everybody getting a trophy, right? And kids not really learning how to deal with adversity. And I think it's this message that you got to go to a good school so that you can get a good job. And I think it's not enough just open conversations about what it's actually like to enter the working world.
Like, right. So what advice would you give to the parents of these young adults that are struggling? Like, what could the parents do to help support their children?
Well, early
going through
on,
this?
encourage them to be independent. And it's not that they shouldn't help them and give them leads. Of course, they if they have connections, because there's certain kids that will not, that refuse to use their parents' connections. That's a real reaction formation in a way. But encourage the parents to help their kids be more independent at a younger age. No, they don't have to talk to them every minute when they're at college to find out how they did on the exam. No, they shouldn't send their English essay home to mama to have her edit it and then return. Can you look at it? Of course. Nothing wrong with that. But there's a lot of dependency, I think.
I also think that there's a lot of transitions that we don't really talk about, right? So these kids who are going off to college who don't really realize what that adjustment is going to be like, going to a new place and having to make friends maybe for the first time since kindergarten and leaving college and what that transition is going to look like. So I think there's a lot more that we could do to talk about and understand that these are major life transitions. Even starting a new school year, if you're a third grader going into fourth grade, it's different, right? And so talk about, because I talk to the parents about, you know what, it's going to take a month for everybody to get settled in and settled down no matter what grade. And the same thing for each break, there's a mini transition and at the end of the school year. And so to me, that's really significant.
And you know what comes up here now, and we've all talked about this amongst ourselves, when they do go off to school, because most of the kids that we work with, most of them are college bound. Some of them don't make it. They don't make it academically. They don't make it socially. And we've talked about these failure to launch kids. Some of them never even go to college and are trying to figure out what to do. Some of them, we encourage them to go to colleges that we probably shouldn't encourage them to go to, at least initially. I have many kids I've had over the years and currently have a number of kids who struggle academically. They may have had IEPs when they were in school or 504 plans, lots of accommodations. And mom and dad, but mostly mom, I have to say.
We're all moms here, so you can throw us all. You can throw us all under the bus.
And what happens is they go off, and we pull a lot of these supports and the lovely people in their high schools that kind of push them along, even starting elementary, middle, and they move on from, matriculate from year to year, and then they get to college, and then they don't have their mother going through their backpack to see when their exams are. Now, some of the schools really colleges provide very good support, academic, coaching.
Sure.
But I have a lot of kids that go off to school for a number of reasons, not just for this reason, but they go and they really bomb out early on. And first semester is rough. The schools have done a very good job more recently, especially since COVID, of adding a lot of support for all the freshmen. But I see them really struggling, and their failures, they come home. And some of them never get back on track. Maybe they should have taken a course or two at a local community college. Now, people look at this and they're very judgmental. What am I going to tell the Harvard parents? But in the end, what happens? So these failure to launch kids, they end up going backwards. So they bomb out at a 4-year school, really struggling. And then when they're finally ready to get back into school, they slowly go back on track, take a class or two at a community college. I shouldn't overgeneralize, because there are many different reasons why kids don't make it in college. But I do think that's a piece of it.
Sure. And there's something to be said about teaching your kids independence all along from the time they walk through their kindergarten classroom, having them do for themselves. So when they do get ready to go off and start adulting, it's not such a shock to them. But you said something interesting. Believe that not every child is destined to have the same path. And I feel like we have pigeonholed our kids into believing that the only path forward is college, when it's such a disservice to so many. There are so many that would benefit, either if it's joining the military or a vocational school, learning a trade somewhere along the way. But what you said, Debbie, was parents turn their nose up to that. And I think it's so important to realize your kids' strengths and their weaknesses and really take their best interests at heart. This isn't about you anymore.
Right.
This is about them.
Right. And I think listening along the way when they're in middle school or they're in high school and they have commented about not enjoying school, or I have other interests or strengths, I think they're saying something. And I think as parents, we should listen and investigate and be like, tell me a little bit more about that. Or maybe I should take a gap year, like they say very flippantly. But I think there's something that us as parents that we should be listening to and asking more questions.
Well,
what do you guys think?
I also think that these kids think that it's all a straight shot up, right? That there's no room for trying something and deciding you don't like it and trying something else and figuring it out, which is what we should allow them to do in school with the extracurriculars and the things that are available to them, right? So that they get a sense that life is a lot of stops and starts. The same thing with these kids come out of school thinking, I've got to have it all figured out. No, you don't. And it puts more pressure on them and just adds to the anxiety.
And for us, that brings in our work with parents. And we're very careful when we work with parents. If kids are under the age of 18, then we need consent to talk to people. I mean, that's a legal bar. But we have some kids, I had, girls more than boys. But I have patients that are like 14 or 15, and I don't need the kids' consent to talk to their parents, but the parents are an important part of the picture, and I let them know. I kind of ask their consent, but if they say no, I tell them I'm going to do it anyway. But I think it's really important for some kids to get rid of the parents, which I do a lot, and we bring them in, but for a family meeting, so I'm not talking to a parent without the kid's knowledge. And there are other kids that don't want to be sitting in a room with their parents. So it really depends, not really on the age or the gender of the kid, but or what the issue is, but on the family. And some bringing family fathers in or not bringing fathers in. So that in our practices, the family work, not that we're trained as family therapists, but the family work is also very important. Yeah.
So we've spoken about college-age kids and their failure to launch. Talk to us a little bit about the school-age children that are having a trouble launching or even going to school. That's something I've been reading a lot about lately. Parents just can't get their kids
and
out the door to school.
An issue near and dear to my heart. And it's changed. The field there's new work and there's new research in the field about what was called school refusal. And I was in the school. She was, and I was a private therapist too, but she was a private therapist on the outside trying to help parents get their kids to school. But going back to school refusal and what it means, because we call it school refusal.
Sure.
But kids don't go to school for different reasons. And the old thinking was they're ODD, they're oppositional defiant kids, they have a disorder. But there are many different reasons. And now school starting up or is already started up. It's a big issue for the school people. Kids aren't showing up. Why aren't they showing up? Maybe they don't have food on their table. Who knows? Maybe they're being abused by someone at home and they can't get into school. Maybe they have a psychiatric diagnosis that nobody really knows about. In the past, oh my God, I spent hours, days, months, years dealing with young kids when I worked with younger kids, middle schoolers, and then high schoolers that weren't showing up. It's illegal. You can only have a certain amount of absences, and the parents are held negligent. But now and I recently heard a psychiatrist talking about this. Now we're leaning in more and trying to figure out why aren't they, was there a trauma that took place recently or long ago? So I think in the field, in school psychology and private practice clinical psychology, we're not just saying, oh, these kids are a pain in the butt and we need to set up a schedule. And if they don't go, then we punish them. And if they do go, we reward them. So we're digging a lot deeper and trying to connect with the kids. And in schools, I spent a lot of time going to homes. Nobody was home. There was a kid hiding in the home, not showing up for school. But I think we can't make any assumptions. We used to.
Yeah.
And it's annoying when you're a school staff person dealing with this and the attendance person goes crazy. This is like an aide whose job is to keep track of who's cutting class, who's not showing up.
Well, and I also think it makes a difference when a parent reaches out to a school, the support or lack of support that they get, what's going on. And
was that something you would recommend? Let's say that the scenarios that Jill mentioned, food on the table, abuse, that is not the case. What are some issues? What is preventing a parent from getting their child out of bed and into school? I have to imagine that for the parent themselves who's going through this, it's really stressful and puts a lot of stress on the entire family. If there are siblings, I can't get my child out of school, there's yelling, who knows what else is going on. So, two-part question, what are these kids? Is it just a control issue for them that it's the one thing they can control? Is it bullying? Is it something else going on in school? And then how do the parents get the support they need to get their child out the door?
It depends. It could be bullying that nobody knows anything about, and we know all kinds of stories that really involve bullying.
I mean, it could also be something happening at home that is causing the child not to want to go to school. So it's not just
not just a school-related issue.
But for parents, it's so important for parents and school people to work together. And a lot of time, depending on what it is, parents are embarrassed. There could be domestic violence, all kinds of, there's so
even
many...
just embarrassment or shame. I can't get my second grader into the class. I'm like, what kind of...
Right. That's my job, to get my kid to school, and I can't do it. It's failure on their part.
To the school teacher first, and then to the school counselor, because you want to try and create a bridge for that child. Because in so many ways, I think kids need to know that there's support from here to here and that everybody knows what's going on and is on the same page.
And that doesn't happen all the time. And also, by the way, it depends on what school we're talking about, what district we're talking about. I worked in the New York City public schools many years ago in schools where the kids lived in hotels. Well, guess what? The parents were trying to survive. And when I would reach out to them, first of all, they didn't have phones at the end. It really depends on whether we're talking about districts like where we work, and mostly where we work, but not completely. It really depends. That's important for schools and parents to work together, collaborate,
try to work together,
trust each other, and it does not happen all the time. And if parents had a history of their own issues, when they were younger, going to school.
I think it could be triggering.
It's really important for parents to look deeper, right? Because you have these parents who are just like, my child won't go to school. They're just being obstinate. They're trying to control the situation. And it goes back to what Debbie said before. We need to dive deeper than that. We need to look deeper because most kids want to be doing what other people are doing, and they want to do what's asked for them. So if they're not, or they're really not able to, and I think that's another piece, is that it's really hard to understand if you've never suffered with any of these kinds of issues, that a person can really feel like they can't do it. It's not that they don't want to do it. Sometimes it is, but sometimes they want to do it, but they really feel and physically and emotionally can't get themselves to do the thing that's needed to do. You've got to be informed.
Right. And so if a school is not wanting to build the bridge with the parents, or if they're not creating a team to help, what can parents then do? Who do they go to next? Do they hire someone themselves, go through insurance? Like, where do they go through for support to have more techniques to help them try to work with their children?
They call Dr. Jill.
And here's a phone number.
So a therapist, is there a certain type of therapy they should be looking for? Cognitive behavior therapy? What is there?
It depends. But
what would you suggest?
One of my big jobs when I was in the schools was referring parents and their kids to outside therapists. There's certain things that schools shouldn't know about. And I didn't want to hear about some of the personal things that were going on.
Yeah.
And that's when you bring in a person that's working privately, where there's certain things that should be confidential. There's certain things that the school should not, I feel strongly about that they should not know about. And there's certain things that they should know about. And it really, it's a case-by-case determination, don't you think?
Yeah. But I think in terms of finding a therapist, you need to make sure that it's somebody who works with children and works with children in the age range that your child is. It's not everybody does this kind of work. It's not everybody can, and not everybody should. And then I think the single most important thing is not how the therapist works, but that the child connects to the therapist, and that the parents feel comfortable. And that should happen within the very first session. And if it doesn't, move on.
And you know what? When people come to me for the first time, particularly teenagers, because the younger ones are a little clueless, but maybe them as well, I say to them, come and meet me. Let's see if it's a good match. I'm trained in CBT and DBT and EDMR, EMDR, dyslexia. Come in, let's see if we can work together. And I ask kids at the end of the first session, do you think, and I could tell right away, we can usually tell after a few minutes, is it going to work or not? And it doesn't always work.
Right.
For different reasons, but it doesn't really, I agree with you. It's about the relationship. It's about trust. That's all it's about.
I remember when one of my children was starting to see a therapist for the first time, and they would ask, what should I be looking for? What if it doesn't work? And I would say, listen, finding a therapist is like finding a good pair of jeans. You have to make sure it's the right fit. And if it's not, we'll find someone else. It's okay. You have to be comfortable talking with them. That's all that matters.
In certain parts of the United States, like upstate New York, there aren't as many therapists as there are around Westchester and New York City. So sometimes you don't have such a choice. Sometimes it isn't such a abundance of people. But the schools, one of my big jobs was really, I took it upon myself to develop a good referral list, know the family, know the therapist, and try to connect people. And if they needed medication, psychiatrists that could connect with the family. So I think that's really important.
I also think that it's really beneficial that COVID has demonstrated to us that we can do this work effectively online. And So another thing that I do is work with an organization that only treats people who are living outside of the United States. So we've been doing Zoom before Zoom was invented. So we've been doing this for 12 years. And I was the first person in the organization to work with a child on Zoom or online because we didn't know if it was doable. And so I think that is remarkable for people who are living in less populated areas, that you can still find somebody and work on Zoom and still have really good, meaningful, helpful work happen.
And it seems like there are definitely places where people can go to find those services for online.
And you list it by your state and then what you're looking for. And we also we're part of different listservs. So very often I'll get a referral or a request and I can't take the person. And so I get permission to post it on the listserv to say, hey, we're looking for somebody who does ABC and maybe takes this insurance. And that's another great resource.
And we also work with wonderful pediatricians and adolescent doctors.
All right. So you guys, Jill, you brought up, you mentioned the word COVID, so I'm going to hop on that. Now, we talked about anxiety, depression. Are we seeing still to this day, a couple of years after people started resuming their lives and not being isolated, are you seeing still some effects on children of COVID and the time they spent possibly isolated or not in school?
Absolutely.
Or in school online?
I had a number of kids who missed their high school graduation, their high school prom, or high school. And
my kid,
most of the kids figured it out and they're doing okay. They got to college. They couldn't go into classes. It's kind of interesting because when COVID hit, we were busier than all of us. Yeah. We have a big network and we worked for hours. And I had a lot of kids that previously suffered from OCD and social anxiety. And guess what? They were so happy. They felt so validated. They didn't have to go to school and talk to people. Everybody was cleaning everything and washing door handles and groceries. Well, those kids, I almost feel like I hate to say they thrived, but they did pretty well during COVID. But when they had to go back and reintegrate, some of those kids are still struggling.
And I find, too, that it's interesting how often kids bring it up, because I think there's a lot of grief in what they didn't get to do. And so it'll be interwoven. Like we're talking about something that happened and they were like, yeah, I missed my whole track season. So I didn't get this opportunity, which has impacted me now. Or, it still comes up every now and then. And again, I have absolutely zero evidence for this, but I think that a lot of the unrest that we're seeing out there in the community has to do with COVID and just the ways that we were locked down. And again, the ways that we didn't get to deal with it emotionally, right? There hasn't been any big sort of emotional program to help people through.
I definitely see it educationally wise with my children. And listen, my kids did a year of school online. My older two are thriving at college. My younger child, definitely gaps in subjects that I feel are so important to be with a teacher, like reading comprehension and really understanding what's going on. I mean, just being able to have a conversation with your teacher. A lot different doing that on person than over a computer.
That younger kids, because I had some younger kids in my practice, they missed certain, some kids are just born reading when they're 1 and they can write when they're 2, but they miss a lot of basic skills. And to this day, they're still struggling. Yeah. And I also work with a bunch of kids on the autism spectrum. And let me tell you, If you think you were pulling your hair out because your kids were home driving you crazy and fighting over, the games that they were video games, parents who depend on schools for 12-month programs, oh my God, they were stuck in their houses with their kid. They had to work remotely, as did many parents. But those kids on the autism spectrum, they were hardly getting their OT, their PT, their speech language support. Those kids really took a big hit, and they're still struggling. I know some now.
Well, the parents became everything. The parents became the occupational therapist, the physical therapist, the speech therapist, because even if there's a Zoom going on, the parent is still the one facilitating the activities. I mean,
kids with ADHD. Oh my God. I had a couple of adolescent boys that I was trying to work with on Zoom. Forget about it. Those kids needed to be in person. We started meeting in parks or walking around my neighborhood because they were in their room, under their bed, all over the place.
I imagine you had to get very creative.
Creative, yes. Yeah. All right. So what can parents do now if they're seeing some of these gaps in their children from COVID, both either socially or academically? Is there something they can do? Is there something they should be working with the school with?
Well, again,
what suggestions do you have?
I think is to make the connection to this may be related to COVID, because I think for many people, COVID's over.
Right.
Like that happened years ago. Move on, right? And so
move on, right?
Yeah.
Initially, you want to make that connection that this could be a COVID gap or a COVID something, a skill this child didn't learn, like how to sit in a group or how to raise your hand to ask a question, and take it back to the teacher and talk to the child about it, right? That these are things that up and engage the child in that conversation and talk to the teacher and go to parent-teacher meetings and see if other parents are experiencing similar things, because that's another thing that happens so often in any of these issues. As a parent, you feel like I'm the only one whose child has this problem, or the child feels like I'm the only one with this problem. And we all know that they're not.
And
so reach out for help. Yes. Find other people to talk to.
Which is why we're doing.
Yeah. That is how we started this. I mean, that can be said for so many things. People think they are the only ones, and it's parenting alone. I mean, you think you're the only one who's having sleepless nights because your newborn is colicky, and you can't see past it in that moment, but you're not alone.
Message. That's the big takeaway. Open lines of communication. And yes, if your kid's in school, talk to the teacher. Develop a relationship. The teacher sees the kid for more hours than you do, during the school year. Really
in a lot of cases, sure.
And then if you're still concerned, then you go and you pursue other people in the schools, or you go outside of the school. If somebody comes to me and says, my kid has this big problem, and I meet with the kid, if I don't think it's a big problem, or I think it's a parent's problem, I will tell them, you know what? You don't really need me now. You may need me down the line, but right now, this is what I recommend, and go and talk to the people at school, or if it's a medical issue or something psychiatric. Just because someone comes to us doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to start seeing them and see them for 10 years. And so,
right.
I appreciate that. I like that advice. I think that's important.
So I'm glad you brought up pediatricians. And so this is something I feel really strongly about, is we take our kids for the milestone appointments with the pediatrician. It feels to me that if my perfect world, if I can wave my magic wand and make it happen, I know it's really, really challenging, but there would also be the mental health checkups beginning at a very young age, so that kids and families would think that this is normal, and that they would be open to discussing things that they might not want to bring up at the milestone visit because we're talking about school or my vaccines or something else. So
Emotional check.
An
Emotional mental
check.
health.
Right. And I know that, pediatricians sometimes don't want to, it's insurance or working in the mental health field, psychologists, psychiatrists, a whole different type of practice. But I would love to see them be together at the younger age groups. Am I pie in the sky? Am I what?
Absolutely. There are more and more, I know some of them, you probably do too. Pediatricians, they're younger. They're not retiring now. But there are I could think of probably 4 or 5 in our area who are very much tuned into mental health issues. And for teenage girls, dealing with changes and boys, changes that their bodies are going through. And they are some of our big referral sources. And they do ask the question, or they have the parents step out if they think that the child in their milestone visits. Some not so much, just like in any field. They're not all like that. There's more and more training in medical school around that. But very well, some doctors are very busy typing in and putting all that info in, and they're not.
Yeah, having that. And you got me on my soapbox here because I think that that emotional stuff should be taught in schools, just like reading, writing, and arithmetic, right? I think that education should come very early on. And to that extent, a good friend of my son's has developed an app called WellCheck that schools are using so that kids can come into a classroom and the teachers will know by looking at the WellCheck if somebody has checked in and said, I'm having a hard day, or my parents had a fight last night, or so that they can access that and sort of just be more responsive to the child and get them the help that they need if it's indicated at that point. And I also think that we have lost community health centers, right? Because in a community-based health center, you would have had all of those things.
But you know what? People are thank God I retired 7 years ago, but people are depending on the schools for much more of that. In New York State, and they give lip service to this, but in New York State, there are requirements, mental health prevention programs, not just for kids that have IEPs or who are in special education or classified as emotionally disturbed, but all of the kids, start K through 12, they are getting dialectical behavior therapy, some cognitive behavior therapy. There are teachers that are getting training. Now, of course, it costs money. And in the political climate in which we live, who knows if we're going to continue to do this. But there is more and more of that in Westchester County in New York and in other parts of New York. Our governor requires these social emotional objectives. Now, some of them people just give lip service to, but some schools, just like anything, really take it to heart. And they really do a lot of this mental health prevention with all of the kids so that they don't have big numbers of kids with special needs. But that's practice, okay?
I think that would be wonderful. I mean, what a great shift for our school-age kids there.
Well,
I'm not going to touch that one.
we are going to keep working on it, and
yes,
I'm going to promote my nephew. Actually, this is something he's at University of Florida and he's starting his senior year, but this is something he really wants to do. He wants to be a lobbyist in the mental health field. So, I hope
we need him for sure.
We need him, and I hope there are a lot of others like him as well. So, I think we're coming to the end of our conversation, as we could, go on forever.
Yeah.
But this has been really enlightening, and I hope that our listeners have a lot of takeaways, because I know myself and Jessica, we've learned a lot today.
Yes. Thank you both.
From you, and we appreciate your time. And for those of you who are listening, if you reach out to us directly at info@parentcoachesunleashed.com, we will connect you, if you wish, to Debbie or Jill. And we will have their contact information in our show notes.
And if there's anything we missed that you want to ask them, we can get in touch with them. We can do a follow-up. However, if there are questions you have, please let us know. Thanks, everybody, for listening. Thank you, ladies, for being with us.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Parent Coaches Unleashed with Carrie and Jessica. Together, we can raise the next generation of independent, capable, and compassionate young adults.
We encourage you to send us an email with questions and feedback to info@parentcoachesunleashed.com. Please remember, you are not alone on this parenting journey.